When Diana slid the key into the front lock that Sunday afternoon in September, Marcus was already on the porch. He had put the for sale sign in the ground himself that morning. 6 o'clock. He pressed the post into the earth until it sat level, checked it from 3 angles, the way he checked everything, and then went inside and made coffee. She came home to a different life than the one she left 3 weeks ago. She just didn't know yet how different. To understand how Marcus got here, you have to go back 11 years. And you have to understand the kind of man he was. Because the kind of man he was is exactly the reason all of this was possible. Marcus Dunn was 41 years old, and he built things the way other men breathed, without thinking about it, without needing credit for it, without stopping to ask whether the effort was worth the cost. Because effort had never been the question for Marcus. Effort was just what you did when something mattered. He had learned it from his grandfather, a quiet man from Beaufort, South Carolina, who had spent 40 years building houses and never once talked about what he was worth. Just showed up. Just worked. Just handed Marcus a hammer on his 7th birthday and said, "Everything you'll ever need to know about a man, you can learn from watching how he treats a wall." Marcus had treated a lot of walls over the years. His business, Dunn Restoration, was not large by any measure that mattered to people who measured things in trucks or staff counts or office square footage. It was 3 people, sometimes 4. Marcus, Ray Okafor, who had been his partner for 9 years, and whatever crew the current job demanded. They did restoration work, old houses, historic buildings, structures that most contractors looked at and saw liability. Marcus looked at them and saw potential. He had a gift for reading a building the way some people read faces, walking through a door and knowing within 20 minutes what the house needed, what it could carry, what was cosmetic and what was structural, what would hold and what would give. He did not need to explain this gift to anyone. He just had it. Ray said once, after their 3rd year working together, that Marcus was the only man he'd ever met who could have a genuine conversation with a foundation. Marcus said foundations didn't need conversation. They needed attention. "There is a difference," he said. "Most people think conversation is a two-way thing. Attention is different. Attention is a man making himself very still and letting the truth of a thing come to him at its own pace." He had applied that same quality to most aspects of his life, his work, his tools, his relationships, the patience of someone who understands that good things are built slow, under pressure, over time, and they either hold or they tell you why they don't. Diana Dunn had been his wife for 9 years. They had met at a charity fundraiser for a historic preservation society, which Marcus had once found either poetic or ironic, depending on the hour. She was working with a non-profit at the time, doing communications, and she was very good at it. She had an ease in a room that Marcus had never possessed, and had admired completely from the first time he watched her work. The ability to move through a crowd and make every person she spoke to feel like the most important person present. Sharp, warm, genuinely funny. She had laughed at something Marcus said at that fundraiser, and then, without pausing, said something funnier. He had called her the next morning. He had not been wrong to fall in love with her. He was clear about that, even now, even after everything. The woman he fell in love with was real. The warmth was real. The intelligence was real. She had cared about him, he believed, in the early years, in the specific way that some people care about people who make them feel safe and solid and grounded, without fully understanding that what they are craving is not the person, exactly, but the feeling. She had grown up watching her mother give everything to a man who gave little back. That was the one thing Diana had told Marcus early, and clearly, and with a rawness that told him it had shaped her in ways she was still working through. She had sworn she would never be financially dependent. Never be without her own money, her own plan, her own exit. She said it like it was a virtue, and it was. It had just become, over time, something different. They had no children. That had been a decision made slowly and then suddenly, the way those decisions go. Marcus had wanted them, quietly and without pressure. Diana had wanted them theoretically, some future version of them, in a future version of their life that kept moving forward without arriving. He had made his peace with it. He was practiced at making peace. What he was not practiced at, what he would be the first to tell you, was noticing when peace had become something else, when accommodation had become invisibility, when a man so practiced at absorbing the weight of difficult things had absorbed too much for too long without anyone, including himself, stopping to ask whether the structure was still sound. The house was in Decatur, Georgia, a craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street, built in 1928, with original hardwood floors and a front porch Marcus had restored himself the first winter they owned it. He had paid for it with savings from 7 years of work before they married. The down payment had been entirely his. The mortgage payments had come predominantly from his income for 11 years. Diana had contributed when she could, which varied with her employment, which had varied considerably across 9 years. He did not hold this against her. He never had. She brought other things. What she had not brought, and what Marcus had been slow to see, was her full self, her full investment, the particular weight of someone who has decided, quietly and without announcement, that a thing is temporary. The signs were there. He knew that now. He had known some of them then, and set them aside with the practiced grace of a man who trusts the foundation he is standing on. The phone she angled away during dinner had started 14 months ago, around the same time the small removals began. He noticed. He filed it. The weekends she began spending with friends whose names he didn't fully recognize, in configurations he couldn't quite track. She was social. She had always been social. He told himself that. The evenings where she came home with a particular quality of quietness that was not tired and not peaceful, but something in between. The quiet of a person who has been somewhere else for a few hours and needs time to come back to themselves. He told himself a lot of things. There were small losses he had not added up. A ceramic bowl her grandmother had left her. The one that used to live on the kitchen shelf, he assumed Diana had put it away somewhere. A wool throw blanket from the reading chair, he assumed it had gone to the dry cleaner. 3 framed photographs from the hallway, all of her from before they met. One of her parents, one of her college graduation, one of a trip she had taken in her 20s to somewhere coastal that he had never asked enough about. Gone, he realized now, for at least 6 weeks. The slight discoloration on the paint still marked where they had hung. Not one move, 12 moves. Months of quiet removal. The girls' trip had been mentioned in June. A group of women from her nonprofit days, an old college roommate, a friend who had moved to Charlotte. 3 weeks in late August into September, renting a house somewhere coastal. Diana talked about it with an ease Marcus recognized only later as practiced ease. The kind that comes from a person who has told a story enough times that they no longer have to think about it while they are telling it. He had said, of course. Have fun. He meant it. He was not a suspicious man by nature. He was an observant one. There is a difference. Observation is paying attention to what is actually there. Suspicion is deciding what you will find before you find it. Marcus never decided things before he had the evidence. Ray Okafor was the one who said it first. They were on a job site the 3rd week of August. A Victorian on Ponce de Leon that needed its original crown molding replicated in 11 rooms. A project Marcus could execute in his sleep, but which Ray found deeply meaningful in the way Ray found most things meaningful. Loudly and with firmly held aesthetic opinions. They were eating lunch on the back steps, sandwiches from the deli up the block, and Ray had gone quiet in the middle of a sentence. Marcus looked at him. Ray took a long pull on his water bottle, set it down, looked out at the yard for a moment, then back. "You know I don't get into your personal business," Ray said. Marcus said he knew. "I saw something," Ray said. "I've been sitting on it, and I'm bad at sitting on things." It had been 4 months prior. Ray was coming out of a restaurant in Buckhead on a Saturday evening, birthday dinner for his sister, the kind of family obligation Ray honored without complaint. And he had seen Diana. Not with a group of women. Sitting across a small corner table from a man Ray did not know, in a part of the restaurant clearly chosen for its distance from the windows and the foot traffic. Ray had taken in enough in the 3 seconds before Diana looked up, and saw him to know the shape of what he was looking at. Not a business dinner. Not a casual catch-up. Something that had been going on long enough to have its own habits, its own preferred table, its own natural ease. Diana had waved. She had introduced the man as a colleague, a real estate contact, someone she was having a conversation with about a project she was working on. The man had shaken Ray's hand with the particular confidence of someone who has decided not to be embarrassed by anything. Ray had been polite. He had eaten his dinner and driven home and thought about it. He had thought about it for 4 months before saying a word. "I'm not telling you what it is," Ray said. "I genuinely don't know what it is. I'm telling you, I saw it." Marcus ate the rest of his sandwich. He did not say anything for a long time. He looked at the back of the house they were working on, at the lath showing through where they had stripped a section of plaster, at the bones of a thing you could only see when you took the surface away. Then, he said, "Okay." Ray nodded. He went back to eating. They finished lunch in silence. Ray picked up his tools without ceremony and went back to work. Marcus sat on the steps for another minute and looked at the yard. He was not reacting yet. He was paying attention. And the first thing he was paying attention to was himself, making sure the thing forming in the back of his mind was information, and not emotion dressed up to look like information. He drove home that evening and walked through the house the way he would walk through a job site. Not quickly. Not nervously. Clinically, room to room, looking at what was actually there, what had actually changed, what he had lived with and not examined. He catalogued 15 items in the first 40 minutes. The bowl. The blanket. The photographs. A small silver clock from the bedroom mantel that had belonged to Diana's aunt. A pair of earrings from a bowl on the dresser that Marcus had bought her in New Orleans 5 years ago, on a trip they had taken together, and both described, at the time, as the best trip of their lives. A collection of paperback novels from the bookcase in the hall. A set of linen napkins her mother had sent. 3 things from the bathroom cabinet. 4 things from the closet. Not 1 move. Not 2. 15 moves across months, sized and paced to be invisible. He sat down at the kitchen table and wrote everything in a notebook. The item, his best estimate of when he had last seen it. He wrote for 30 minutes. Then he opened his banking app. Their joint account, the household account Diana had access to, showed a transfer from 3 weeks ago, the day before she left for the trip. $400 moved to an account he did not recognize. He scrolled back. Another in July. $600. One in June. $350. Small amounts. Never the same number twice. Sized to disappear inside ordinary household spending, the way a thin crack disappears inside a wall if you are not looking with the right attention. He closed the app. He set the phone down on the table. He sat with the notebook and the phone in front of him and let the full weight of what he was looking at become real. He was not devastated. He was clear. There is a difference, and the difference is important. Devastation is what happens when a thing you counted on disappears without warning. Clarity is what happens when you have been paying attention long enough that nothing disappears. It simply becomes visible. He closed the notebook. He called his uncle Garrett. Garrett had retired from property law after 31 years. He lived 40 minutes north of Decatur in a house he had paid cash for in 1998, filled with books he had actually read and a back porch that faced a quiet pond he fished regularly regardless of whether anything was biting. He had the particular stillness of a man who had spent 3 decades listening to people in distress and had learned that most of what they needed was not advice, but attention. Marcus drove up Saturday morning. They sat on the back porch in the cool of an early September morning, the pond reflecting the trees in its flat surface, and Marcus laid it out in order. The items he had catalogued. The transfers. Ray's account of the Buckhead restaurant, the way Diana had said, in June, 3 months before the trip, that she needed space to figure out what she actually wanted. She had said it without drama, almost casually, the way you say something you have already decided, and are now simply announcing. Garrett listened all the way through. Then he said, "The house. You paid it off." Marcus nodded. 14 months ago. He had made the final payment quietly, ahead of schedule by working more than was wise for longer than was sustainable. He had wanted to tell Diana, had been planning to. A dinner. Something considered. The kind of moment where you hand someone something you have built with your own hands. But something had shifted in the temperature of the house over those same months, and he had kept waiting for the right time, and the right time had not arrived. "Does she know?" Garrett said. "She thinks there's still 2 years on the mortgage." Garrett was quiet. He looked out at the pond. A heron stood in the shallows on the far side, absolutely still, waiting with the patience of something that has never had to be convinced that patience works. "So she's been calculating her position based on numbers that aren't real," Garrett said. "Seems that way. That changes the shape of things." Garrett turned his coffee cup in his hands. Not what she's done, what she actually has access to. He told Marcus what needed to happen. 3 things. In order. Documentation, everything Marcus had observed, dated, written down, turned into a record that existed outside his own memory. Legal counsel, someone who handled marital property disputes and had seen this specific configuration before. And information. The full picture of what he was inside, before he made a single visible move. "The worst thing a man can do in a situation like this," Garrett said, "is act before he knows everything. Moving without the full picture is how you lose what you should have kept." Marcus drove home with the windows down. He added items to the notebook he had not yet written. He called Ellis Wade that evening. Ellis was a family law attorney Garrett had worked across from on 2 cases, and recommended without qualification. His office was quiet, near the courthouse, a desk surface with nothing on it that wasn't relevant to the current conversation. He listened to Marcus in the same way Garrett had, without interrupting, with the precise attention of someone assembling a structure in his mind. He pulled up the property records. The paid-off mortgage was there, dated and clean. Ellis looked at it. He looked at Marcus. "She has no documented claim on the principal," he said. "Years of marriage. Yes, courts account for that. But your down payment, your payments across 11 years, the documented financial disparity, that record is on your side. If she's been moving assets and planning an exit, the timing of those moves matters. We need the account records." They requested them through proper channels. Ellis filed a notice of marital property dispute, nothing yet visible to Diana, just logged, made real on paper, the way things become real when they need to. Marcus went home. He walked through the house again. He sat in the kitchen where he had eaten 11 years of meals and thought about what it meant to build something and not know if the other person ever fully moved in. He thought about the girls' trip. He thought about a coastal house somewhere, and a woman who had been renting furniture out of her marriage for months, and a man named whatever his name was who thought he was getting something real. He made himself dinner. He ate it at the kitchen table. He did not turn on the television. 3 days later, Ellis called. The account records told the story that the items in the notebook had suggested. 17 transfers over 9 months. Amounts between $200 and $800. No pattern in the size, every one of them perfectly calibrated to disappear inside ordinary spending. Total, $6,400, moved to a personal account Diana had opened 14 months ago. The same month Marcus had made the final mortgage payment without telling her. Same month. He sat in Ellis's office and looked at the column of dates and numbers. He thought about what he had been doing 14 months ago, working longer hours than he should have, taking weekend jobs to get ahead of the last year of mortgage payments, eating dinner alone 3 or 4 nights a week because Diana was out with friends or working late or at that yoga studio she'd joined, and he had not thought to question. He thought about the morning he clicked confirm on the final mortgage payment. The specific warmth of it. The way he had sat at the kitchen table with the confirmation on his screen and wanted to call someone and had ended up just sitting with it alone because it was a Saturday morning and the moment felt private. He had been planning to tell her that evening. She had come home in a mood he couldn't read, and dinner had been quiet, and he had told himself there would be a better moment. There was never a better moment. She opened the personal account, Ellis said, reading Marcus's expression, right around the time you paid the house off. Yes, Marcus said. So either the timing is a coincidence, it's not a coincidence, Marcus said. Ellis nodded once. He closed the folder. He asked Marcus what outcome he was working toward. Marcus thought about it. Not the way you think about something you haven't decided. The way you think about something you have already decided and are making sure you can say clearly. I want to have already moved before she gets home, he said. Ellis understood. That evening Marcus called Patricia Holt. He had known Patricia for 8 years through Preservation Society work, restoration projects that sometimes intersected with historic property sales. She was meticulous and moved at her own pace and did not pad her timelines with vague encouragement. She asked direct questions and expected direct answers. He told her he needed to sell the house in Decatur. She asked about the timeline. He said Diana was coming home in 11 days. There was a brief pause on Patricia's end. Not hesitation, she was thinking. I have a couple, she said, who have been waiting on a craftsman in Decatur for 6 months. They want to restore, not flip. They have financing ready. She paused. I need to list it. He said he'd put the sign up himself. She said she'd have the paperwork to him by end of week. He sat at the kitchen table after the call. The house was quiet around him. He looked at the walls he had refinished, the trim he had stripped and repainted, the floor he had repaired board by board in the 2nd year, because he had wanted it done right. He had put 12 years of Saturdays into this house. Every repair, every improvement, every layer of care pressed into the wood and the plaster and the brick. He was not sentimental about it. He was clear. Clarity feels different than sentiment. Sentiment holds on. Clarity understands what something was worth and lets it go cleanly. He sat there a while longer with the confirmation of the listing on his phone and the quiet of the house around him. He thought about Deanna calling from wherever the coastal rental was, checking in. Her voice easy and warm and practiced, asking how he was doing, and him saying, fine, work is steady, take your time. He had said all of those things. He had meant none of them as she understood them. There is a particular kind of peace in knowing that the decision has been made. Not announcing it, not performing it, just carrying it quietly. The way you carry a thing that has real weight, close to the body, without showing anyone how heavy it is. That peace had been with him since the morning he called Ellis. It had not left him since. He opened the notebook to a fresh page and started making a list for the movers. The days between the listing and Diana's return had their own particular quality. Not tense, not mournful, just clear. The way a work site feels in the week before a project closes, everything decided, the sequence locked, all that remains is the doing. Marcus went to work every morning at the regular hour. The Victorian on Ponche de Leon was in its final phase. The replicated molding was in, all 11 rooms. What remained was the detail work, the ceiling medallions, the window casings, the careful painting that made new work look as though it had always been there. This was Marcus's favorite part of any job, not the dramatic rescue of the structure, but the patient finishing that made rescue invisible. The point was never for anyone to notice what you had done. The point was for the house to look as though nothing had ever been wrong. He and Ray worked in a comfortable quiet those days, the way they always worked when a job was going well and nothing needed to be said. Ray had not asked him anything further about Diana since the conversation on the back steps. He was not the kind of man who asked questions twice. He had said what he saw, handed it over, and let Marcus carry it wherever it needed to go. That was the particular quality of Ray as a partner and as a friend. He understood that some information you share because a person needs it, and once you have shared it, your job is done. Marcus came home to the rental in the evenings and ate dinner and sat on the small back steps of the rental with his coffee and thought about the Kirkwood house. He had driven past it twice since putting in the offer, which had been accepted the previous week. He had not gone inside again yet. He wanted to wait until it was his, before he started seeing it as his. That was a discipline he had developed over years of restoration work. You do not let yourself imagine a finished thing until the commitment is complete, because imagination ahead of commitment is just another way of hurting yourself. He called Garrett on a Wednesday evening. They talked for an hour, not about the legal proceedings, which were proceeding in Ellis's hands and did not require Marcus's attention. They talked about Beaufort, about his grandfather's house, which had been sold after his grandmother passed and was now owned by someone who had painted the exterior a color that Garrett described as a public offense. They talked about the nature of attachment to places, whether it was a weakness or a form of loyalty, and whether there was actually a difference. Garrett said, "When this is done, go back and visit. You'll understand something about yourself that you can't quite access from a distance." Marcus said he would go. He had called his mother twice during those weeks. She lived in Macon, in a house where she had lived for 30 years, and she had a way of listening on the phone that communicated full attention without requiring her to fill every pause with sound. He had told her the shape of things, not all of it, enough she had listened to all of it. She said, "You sound like yourself." He said he was. She said, "That's the only thing I needed to know." He had eaten dinner alone most evenings during those weeks, which was not so different from many of the evenings across the last several years of the marriage, except that now the aloneness felt chosen rather than incidental. There is a significant difference in how solitude feels depending on whether you have been left in it or whether you have arrived there on your own. He had been left in it for a long time. He was arriving in it now. On a Sunday evening, 9 days into the 3-week trip, he had gone back to the house in Decatur. Not to take anything. Not for any logistical reason. He had just driven over in the late afternoon and let himself in and walked through the rooms slowly. The moving company was coming on Thursday. The sale would close after the proceedings settled, but he had wanted to do this once. Just the walk. Just the seeing of it. He went through each room in the order he had always moved through them. The kitchen first, then the front room, then the hallway, then up the stairs. He stood in the room that had been their bedroom for 9 years and looked at it for a long time. The closet door was open. Her side of it was nearly empty. She had taken things in stages, one trip at a time, over months. And the absence on her side of the closet was not sudden. It was the completion of something gradual. He was not sad in that room. He was honest. He thought about what the room had been, and what had actually been happening in the room and in this house across the time they lived in it, and he let the two things sit side by side without trying to resolve them into something simpler. Then he went downstairs and locked the front door and got in his truck and drove back to the rental. Patricia had called that evening. She had an update on the buyers. They wanted to start the restoration consultation as soon as the sale closed, and she wondered if Marcus might be interested in a referral. He said he was. She said she thought they might ask. She said the husband was a careful listener, and the wife had a very specific vision that Marcus would either love or want to argue with. He said he was good at both. Patricia laughed. She said good night. He said good night. Marcus had been on day 11 of the girls' trip, 10 days before Diana was scheduled to come home, when the call came from an attorney named Carson Hill. He had been at the Ponce de Leon Victorian, on the second floor, fitting a section of replicated molding, while Ray held the other end and made structural observations about 19th century woodworking that Marcus did not ask for. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He handed his end to Ray, stepped to the landing, and answered. Carson Hill was formal and precise on the phone, which Marcus respected. A man who knew how to present information without dressing it up. The substance of the call was this. His client had a personal relationship with Diana Dunn, and in the course of that relationship, Diana had represented to his client a potential financial stake in the Decatur property, based on years of contribution to the marital household. His client was Preston Albright. He was seeking clarification on the status of the home's title before any sale proceedings moved forward. Marcus listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "Has your client spoken with a Georgia family law attorney about the specific language of marital asset statutes in this state?" A careful pause. "I'd recommend that before this conversation goes further," Marcus said. "There are facts on the property record that may affect your client's understanding of the situation." He ended the call. He went back to the molding. Ray looked at him. Marcus said, "Hold your end steady." He called Ellis from the parking lot at lunch, laid out the call in order. Ellis said exactly what Marcus had expected him to say. The claim was thin. The documented financial history was on Marcus's side. The notice of marital property dispute filed weeks ago meant any third party attempting to assert a derivative claim through Diana would walk directly into a wall of paperwork and would spend money doing it. The paid-off mortgage made the title simple. There was no position from which Preston Albright's interest could be inserted into the property record without a sustained legal fight they were not positioned to win. "They're trying to slow you down," Ellis said. "They're hoping you'll stop moving long enough to negotiate." "I'm not negotiating," Marcus said. "I know." The next 2 days had a particular texture. Carson Hill filed a procedural inquiry with the court. Not a motion, not a challenge, just a speed bump. Something designed to produce friction, to give Marcus a number to think about, to remind him that there were people with resources on the other side of this situation. And resources had a way of complicating things that were otherwise simple. Marcus did not stop. He told Patricia the timeline held. He called the movers and confirmed his booking. He went back to the Victorian and finished the molding and had dinner with Ray and Ray's wife, who cooked enough food for 12 and spoke to Marcus the way she always spoke to him, directly and with affection, and without any particular delicacy about the fact that she considered his personal life one of her ongoing projects. He drove home after dinner and sat in the kitchen for a while. He thought about Diana coming home, what she was expecting to find. She would have been talking to Preston, updating him, telling him how she thought Marcus would react. She had said, in June, that she needed space to figure out what she actually wanted. At the time, he had heard that as unhappiness, as an invitation to do better. He had made a list that night of things he was going to change. He understood now that she already knew what she wanted. She had decided quietly not to tell him the whole truth yet. The procedural inquiry was reviewed and dismissed in 3 business days. Ellis had submitted the full property record, the complete mortgage history, the paid-off lien, the 11-year payment documentation, Marcus's down payment. And the inquiry dissolved the way arguments dissolve when they run into accurate numbers kept by a careful man. Carson Hill did not call again. The offer on the house came in on Friday. The couple Patricia had mentioned, a young pair from Atlanta, who wanted to restore the original details and knew enough to hire someone who understood how to do it properly. Marcus reviewed the terms with Ellis over the phone that afternoon. He signed the acceptance at 6 o'clock. Patricia put the sign in the yard on her way home. He told her he'd handle the sign himself. He set his alarm for 5:30. He put the post in the ground at 6 the next morning, with the street still quiet around him, and the air carrying the particular cool of a September morning that hadn't decided yet to be warm. He pressed the post until it was level, checked it from 3 angles, made a small adjustment at the base. Then he went inside and made coffee. He was on the porch, the coffee going cool beside him on the railing, the September light coming down long across the yard, when Diana's car turned onto the street. She pulled in slowly. He watched her. He watched the instant she saw the sign, the specific moment when her head stopped moving, and the understanding hit. She sat in the car for a moment with the engine running. Then she got out. She stood in the driveway and looked at the sign. Then she looked at him. Marcus did not stand. He did not put down his coffee. He did not call across the yard. He watched her come toward the porch. She had her big canvas bag on her shoulder, the one she took on trips, and her face was doing something complex and rapid that he recognized as the sequence of a person who has been caught by the wrong version of events and is scrambling to locate the right response. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Marcus," she said. "What is this?" "Come up on the porch," he said. She came up. She did not sit. She stood with her arms loosely crossed and her eyes moving from the sign to him, making calculations, working angles, doing math. He could see her working. He let her. "I don't understand what's happening," she said. He reached to the table beside the chair. He picked up the folder Ellis had sent over the day before. He opened it and set the first page on the railing between them. The signed sale agreement. Her name on the document as required party by marital property statute. Executed and filed. She looked at it. He set the second page beside it. The property record. His name. The lien line blank. Paid in full dated 14 months ago. She looked at that one for longer. He set the third page down. The financial records. The 17 transfers. 9 months of movement. The personal account she had opened the same month he made the final mortgage payment and never mentioned. He set the fourth page down. A summary Ellis had prepared of the legal position. Clean, precise, the way Ellis did everything. Then Marcus put his hands flat on the railing and waited. The porch was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's sprinkler came on. The September light did what September light does. Went gold and unhurried across the grass, across the for sale sign, across the distance between where Marcus was standing and where Diana had thought she was going. Diana looked at all 4 pages. She put her hand out and braced on the railing. "You've been planning this," she said. Her voice was not quite right. Controlled, but not quite right. "No," Marcus said. He said it without heat. "You've been planning something. I've been paying attention. There's a difference." She tried several things in the order people try things when the map they've been using runs out of road. Confusion first. Surely there was a conversation to have about this. Surely nothing needed to be this final. This could not be what it looked like from the outside. She said his name. Twice, she said, "Just talk to me." He looked at her steadily. He let the confusion pass. Indignation next. He had made a unilateral decision about their shared life. He had done something this significant without consulting her. 9 years of marriage, and he had put a sign in their yard without even picking up the phone. Her voice found some of its usual authority here, the particular register she used when she wanted a room to understand that she was serious. He let that pass, too. Then the version of pain that was real. Because some of it was. She had not expected this outcome. Whatever she had been imagining. Whatever version of the story she had been rehearsing in the coastal house for 3 weeks. had not included coming home to something already decided, already signed, already filed. The gap between what she had planned and what she was looking at was real enough to produce something that looked like genuine shock. He did not discount that it was genuine shock. She said she had not wanted it to go like this. She had been trying to figure out how to talk to him. She had not found the right moment. She had been scared of hurting him. She had kept waiting for a time when she felt clear enough to be honest. He looked at her. He said, "You've been moving things out of this house for 8 months. The word things landed differently than any argument could have. Not an accusation. A measurement. The specific documented kind." She looked at him. He said, "I know about the account." He said it quietly. Just that. Not followed by a list, not followed by the folder yet, just the sentence standing in the space between them like something that had been there all along, waiting to be said. Something moved across her face. Not the indignation, not the confusion, something older and less rehearsed. The particular expression of a person who has been caught not by anger or by accusation, but by accuracy. Then she tried the version she had been building toward. She said it hadn't been nothing. Whatever she had with Preston. She said it had happened because something had been wrong between them for a long time. She said she had been lonely. She said she had felt invisible in this house, and in this life and in his life, and none of that excused what she had done, but it explained it. And she needed him to at least hear that. He heard it. He let it be true. The parts that were true. She had been lonely. He had worked too many hours. He had been present in the ways that mattered to him and absent in the ways that mattered to her. And that was a real thing. He had contributed to a real failure. He held that without flinching. Then he reached to the table beside his chair and picked up the folder. He set the first page on the railing. The signed sale agreement. She looked at it. He set the second page beside it. The property record, the paid-off lien, the date. 14 months ago. She read that line twice. He watched her read it twice. He watched something recalibrate behind her eyes. "You paid it off," she said. "A year and 2 months ago." A brief silence. The porch was very quiet. The neighbor's sprinkler had stopped. The light was going gold across the yard, across the sign, across the distance between them. "You never told me," she said. "No," he said. She absorbed that. Then she said, "So when I," and stopped. She started again. "When I talked to Preston about the house." She stopped again. Marcus set the third page down. The financial records. The 17 transfers. 9 months, 17 movements, $6,400. She looked at the numbers. She looked at her own name on the account at the top. He watched her understand, fully and completely, that she had been making calculations based on a number that had never been accurate. That everything she and Preston had discussed about the house and its equity and her position had been built on a foundation that did not exist. That the financial floor she had been quietly constructing for months was not what she had been told it was, because she had never actually known what she had been standing on. He let that sit. Then he put his hands flat on the railing and waited. He listened to all of it without rushing her. He gave her the space to finish. When she arrived, finally, at the thing underneath all of it, she said the thing she had said in June. She said she had needed space to figure out what she actually wanted. Marcus picked up the folder. He held it out to her. She looked at it. She looked at his face, looking for the grief she had been planning to manage, the softness she had been counting on. She did not find it. What she found was something she had not fully prepared for. A man who was completely present and completely past her at the same time. A man who had done his grieving somewhere else, in some private hour she had not been there for, and had come out the other side of it into something she did not have a response prepared for. "I hope you figured it out," he said. She looked at the folder. She looked at him. She took it. He stood up. He picked up his coffee. He walked to the front door, and he did it the way he did everything, without drama, without performance, with the quiet certainty of a man who has finished with something and is simply proceeding to what comes next. He did not slam the door. He closed it the way you close something that has served its purpose. The consequences of that Sunday afternoon settled the way consequences settle when the math has already been done before anyone shows up to argue it. Diana retained an attorney within 4 days of that Sunday. An attorney who was, by all accounts, experienced and capable, the kind of professional who understood the landscape of contested marital property and knew how to read a financial record. What he found, when he requested the complete property documentation from Ellis's office, was a record so thorough and so clearly organized that the capable attorney called Diana that same evening and had a conversation she had not been expecting. The paid-off mortgage was there, dated 14 months ago. The documentation of Marcus's down payment, his alone, from savings accumulated before the marriage, was there. His 11 years of predominantly solo mortgage payments were there, month by month. The disparity between his financial contribution and Diana's was measurable to the penny, because Ellis had measured it to the penny. The notice of marital property dispute, filed weeks before Diana came home, was there in the record. Establishing the timeline with clarity, Marcus had not reacted. He had moved deliberately in sequence before the confrontation, before the sign, before the porch. He had done everything first. The attorney told Diana what the record meant for her position, the claim Diana had been quietly constructing for months, the settlement she had been calculating. The financial floor she expected to walk away with did not materialize in the form she had imagined. The $6,400 was in the record as undisclosed transfers of marital funds. Ellis addressed it in the settlement calculation. It was addressed. She received something from the settlement. Courts account for 9 years of marriage, for domestic contribution, for the shared life that had been real regardless of how it ended. Diana was not left with nothing. But what she had was not what she had planned, not the number Preston had helped her project into their conversations about what came next, not the foundation she had been quietly building for 14 months. Preston Albright's involvement in the property proceedings had created a paper trail he had not intended to create. His attorney's procedural inquiry, dismissed cleanly and quickly in 3 business days, now sat in the court record as evidence of his client's awareness of and active interest in assets he had no legal claim to. Preston was an experienced real estate investor. He understood deal structure. He understood liability. He understood, when his own counsel laid it out in plain language, what a public proceeding of this nature could do to professional relationships built on a reputation for clean transactions. The kind of people he did business with were the kind of people who asked questions. And a court record showing that Preston had attempted to assert financial interest in a married woman's marital property through a procedural inquiry was not the kind of answer those questions wanted. His attorney had called Carson Hill within a week of the inquiry's dismissal and suggested a quiet retreat from all involvement in the matter. Preston retreated. He had not been building a life with Diana in quite the way Diana had understood them to be building one. He had been building a possibility. Possibilities for a man like Preston were numerous. They required assessment. When the assessment on the Decatur property came back negative, the possibility was assessed accordingly. Diana found this out the way people find things out when the structure they have been constructing turns out to have been built on someone else's projections. She moved into an apartment in Midtown. It was on the 4th floor of a building on a street she had not chosen for any particular reason. It was smaller than she had expected to end up in at this point in her life. The life she had imagined, the one she had been preparing to step into, the one that had required 14 months of careful, staged preparation, had not arrived in the form she had prepared for. She was a sharp, capable woman who had made a deliberate plan and had executed significant elements of it with genuine discipline and real effort. She had been meticulous. She had been patient. She had done many things correctly, and she had landed somewhere that was not the plan. The attorney she had retained explained the settlement terms. She absorbed them. She did not contest the foundation of them, because there was nothing in the record to contest from. She signed where she was told to sign. Marcus noticed this outcome the way you notice a structural result you already understood was coming. Not with satisfaction, not with grief, with the flat acknowledgement of a man who has stood in enough foundations to know what they can carry and what they cannot. The claim Diana had been quietly building toward. The settlement she had been mentally calculating for months. The financial position she believed she was walking away with did not arrive in the form she had imagined. Courts consider spousal financial contribution in marital asset division. Diana's contributions were real and documentable, but they were inconsistent across 9 years, and the disparity between her financial investment and Marcus's was measurable to the cent. What she received from the settlement was not nothing, but it was not what she had planned. It was not what Preston had projected into their conversations about the future they were building. The $6,400 entered the record as undisclosed transfers of marital funds. Ellis addressed it in the settlement calculation. It was addressed. Preston Albright's involvement in the property proceedings had created a paper trail he had not intended to create. His attorney's procedural inquiry, dismissed cleanly and quickly, now sat in the court record as documentation of Preston's awareness of and interest in assets he had no legal standing to access. Preston was an experienced real estate investor. He understood, when his own counsel explained the exposure in plain terms, what a public proceeding of this nature could do to professional relationships built on a reputation for clean deals. Preston had not been building a life with Diana in quite the way Diana had understood them to be building it. She found this out the way people find things out when the architecture of a plan falls over and the actual shape of what was underneath it becomes visible. She moved to an apartment in Midtown. It was smaller than she had expected to end up in. She had not imagined this version of the outcome. She was a sharp, capable woman who had made a deliberate plan and had executed significant parts of it with real discipline, and it had delivered her somewhere that was not the plan. Marcus noticed this the way you notice a structural outcome you already understood was coming. Not with satisfaction. Not with grief. With the flat acknowledgement of a man who has looked at enough buildings to know that what holds holds and what doesn't tells you exactly why. He had moved into a short-term rental in Decatur while the sale closed. Ray's wife had insisted on cooking for him every Sunday for the first 6 weeks, which he had tried politely to decline, and which she had declined to accept. He had eaten extremely well on Sundays. Garrett called once a week. Not about the proceedings, those were in Ellis's hands and proceeding with the methodical precision that characterized everything Ellis did. Garrett called about other things. The Pond, a book he was reading about the history of shotgun houses in the American South that he thought Marcus would find worth his time. Whether Marcus had been back to Beaufort recently. Marcus had not been back. Garrett said he should go. Not for any particular reason. Just because some places you need to visit, not for what they give you, but to remember what built you. Marcus said he would. He meant it. Ray mentioned, on a job site in October, while they were installing replacement windows in a mid-century house in Inman Park, that Camille at the Preservation Society had asked about him. He said it the way Ray said things, without elaboration, leveling a window sash while he talked, as if the information were simply a measurement he was offering. Marcus said, "Okay." Ray set the level on the sash. "Read it." Made a small adjustment. "She's a good woman," he said. Marcus said he wasn't there yet. Ray said, "You don't need to be there yet. You just need to know the information exists." Marcus let the information exist. In November, he put in an offer on a 4-square house in Kirkwood, 1922 construction that had spent 40 years as a rental and looked every one of them. Bad paint over original trim. A bathroom tiled in the 1970s with the particular confidence of someone who knew nothing about tile and couldn't be told otherwise. A kitchen with a layout that had no relationship to how people actually used kitchens. 3 generations of deferred maintenance stacked on top of a structure that had never asked for any of it. Structurally, she was sound. The first day Marcus walked through her, he went straight to the basement. He stood in the foundation and ran his hand along the concrete, pressed his palm flat the way his grandfather had taught him. The way you learn what something is actually made of, not by looking at it, but by letting the truth of it come through your hand. She was good. He made an offer that afternoon. Simone lived 2 houses down. He met her the way you meet neighbors in a neighborhood where people actually live in their houses, over a hedge, on a weekday afternoon, her returning a power drill she had found in the garage that must have belonged to the previous owners. He was standing on the porch looking at a section of trim that was going to require more work than it had presented as requiring, which was a quality this house shared with most things worth doing. She had asked what he was doing with the place. He had told her. She had opinions about the trim. They were good opinions. She was a landscape architect who worked mostly on residential projects and had the particular quality of a person whose work required them to think in long timelines. Not what a thing looks like now, but what it becomes if you give it the right conditions and stay out of its way. They had talked for 20 minutes about the trim, and then about the history of the house, and then about the neighborhood, and then about other things that had nothing to do with either. She had laughed at something he said, and he had noticed that it was the real laugh, not the social version, and he filed that away without making it mean more than it meant yet. She came over on a Saturday in November to look at the finish samples he had taped to the front room wall. She stayed for dinner, which neither of them had planned, and they talked for 3 hours about things that had very little to do with houses and a great deal to do with how people decide what they want their lives to look like, what they are willing to keep doing, and what they are finally willing to stop. He was not rushing anything. He was not going to rush anything. Camille from the Preservation Society had called him in December. She had a mid-century commercial building in Cabbagetown that the Historical Society was trying to save, and she wanted to know if he would consult on the structural assessment. He said he would. He had spent 2 days in that building and walked out with a full picture of what it needed and what it could bear. The report he submitted was clean and honest. Some of it was good news. Some of it was not. He did not soften the parts that were not. Camille said it was the most useful assessment they'd ever received from a contractor. Marcus said that was the only kind worth giving. He thought sometimes about the girls' trip, not with bitterness. More the way you think about a thing after you have moved past it and can see its actual shape from a distance. 3 weeks. She had taken 3 weeks in a coastal rental to do something she had been doing in smaller increments for 14 months. He had spent those same 3 weeks doing what he had already decided to do, not because he had known what she was doing, not at first, but because he had been paying attention, and the attention had been enough. He thought about what would have happened if he had not been paying attention. If he had been the man Diana and Preston had discussed in their planning, the one who fell apart inward, who absorbed hard things and went quiet, who would rather take the loss with dignity than extend the pain. He had been that man, in some configurations of himself. It was not untrue. He had absorbed a great deal over 9 years, and he had done it quietly and without complaint. The difference was that absorbing something and being destroyed by it are not the same thing. He had absorbed, and he had also been watching, and when the watching gave him what he needed, he had moved. Not out of anger, not out of pride, out of the simple, clear understanding that some foundations are not worth building on. He was building on a different one now. He thought, sometimes, about what his grandfather had said about walls. What you could learn from watching how someone treated the things they were responsible for. He had treated his things responsibly. He had paid his mortgage for 11 years. He had put 11 years of labor into a house until it was worth considerably more than when he came to it. He had watched a woman quietly remove herself from a life she had never fully moved into, and he had paid attention, and when the time came, he had moved first. Not in anger, not in retaliation, in the clean, deliberate way of a man who has assessed a structure, found it unsound at its core, and known when it was time to build something else. On a cold Tuesday morning in January, Marcus was crouched at the base of the fireplace surround in the front room of the Kirkwood house, pressing his palm flat against the plaster, while Ray stood behind him with his coffee and had opinions about the mantel height that Marcus had not solicited. The light was coming in through the east window, the way light comes through east windows in the morning, long and clean and without any particular agenda except to illuminate what is already there. Marcus pressed his palm against the wall. He felt it. Cool, set, the particular density of something that has been in place long enough to mean it. He took his hand away. He made a note in his notebook. He stood up. Some things you build and lose. Some things you build and keep. Some things you build and hand to whatever comes next. And the building was the point all along, not the holding. The foundation doesn't argue with what rests on it. It doesn't negotiate. It simply holds, or it tells you exactly and honestly why it doesn't. And you go from there. This house was going to hold. He could feel that already, in the same way his grandfather had taught him to feel it, through his palm, through the attention of a man who has made himself still enough for the truth to come through. Marcus picked up his coffee. He was exactly where he had decided to be. If this story settled in you the way a solid foundation settles, not with noise, but with weight, pass it on to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you catch the next one. Some stories take a while to build. That's how you know they'll hold.